So very good day to all of you listeners out there. Welcome to another episode of Simon Says, and I have Lyra here today.
Hello, everyone.
And Lyra is very near state election time, right? And now we haven't had a lot of episodes on that, but we are now just a few days from state election. And just now we're just discussing, right? And it's like, what do we want to talk about? And later, David Tian from Banana Republic will be joining us for a live call because he is actually working in Kedah. And we want to just hear a bit of his reporting and what he is feeling on the ground. But that will be a bit later. But Lyra, there are so many issues across the states. If we want to talk about all the separate issue, it will be just kind of too many to discuss. But I think we can kind of look at some macro issue and some of the issues that you feel is important and maybe even overlook in the discussion. But what are some of the issues that are close to your heart, in these last few days or weeks?
I wouldn't say just overlook. There's also another spectrum whereby it's overly emphasized.
Such as?
Yeah, so we could just start by looking at the green wave.
Yep.
So is it a real threat or not? So I think in this episode, we do want to discuss some of these things that are really dear to the heart of the people.
Yep.
Because you have one group of people, especially the Pakatan Harapan supporters.
Yep.
They really bought into this whole narrative, and whereby they really just want to see if, I guess it's really the narrative that is being pushed by Pakatan Harapan themselves, and especially the coalition, the unity government. So they will be saying that, look, green wave is a real threat, and if you do not come out to vote, we run into the risk of having state governments being ruled by the opposition party, which is Pakatan Nasional.
Now, it's interesting that the whole thing about green wave was, like you say, kind of perpetrated by the unity government especially. And I think one of the things we were just discussing earlier was that perhaps they really want to spook their base, so that they'll come out. Because it is a game of margin, right? It's like the last general election, we have seen the outcome and the vote pattern of the non-Malay, especially in urban area, is almost at a very max level already. So, and generally, state election tend to attract less voters. Overseas voters are not going to make this extra special trip. Some may not even be motivated by postal voting. So you do expect a bit of drop down. My own feeling about why so much emphasis on the green wave, especially by the media that tends to support Pakatan Harapan point of view, is they really want a higher turnout. I mean, that's one of the way to look at it. But is the green wave a reality? Is it a primary issue in this state election?
Well, I would say that there are certain legitimacy to it. I mean, we're not undermining or even downplaying the threat of green wave in this state election, but is it really that much of a threat? I don't think so. I mean, because a lot of political scientists, they were just looking at the data. So in the last GE, so if you only just look at the last general election and then you could quickly draw your conclusion to this becoming a threat to state elections, I think that's a little bit too short of the data to be analyzed.
And we have discussed before in this show that the trend towards Pakatan Nasional, the so-called green wave, was it really, there is support for the 3R? Is there really support for what PAS is doing, for example? Or is it really a vote against UMNO? And that's the thing that we have been discussing quite frequently in this show. The answer is we simply do not know. We don't know if that translates into one kind of pattern. Now, of course, a lot of analysis on the shift away from Barisan Nasional, especially from UMNO. So is it really people want a Pakatan Nasional with Muhyiddin, with Awang Hadi, or is it because people are sick of UMNO?
Well, I think if we just look at the episode whereby, I mean, earlier on the saga concerning YB from Kedah, like Sanusi SP. So you also have people like doubling down, like KJ, saying that, look, how come one can say about one of the R and how about the other person who is also saying another 2R? So those sort of things, you begin to really ponder, so what is it that they are not saying? I mean, or are they actually manifesting? So I think it's probably a propaganda from the Perikatan Nasional, really to push the 3R agenda a bit subtly, but also a bit in your face sort of situation. So I think when people look at this whole things, I think it is legitimate to say that people kind of spoke out because, oh, is that really your agenda? Because I felt like the last general election, probably people are voting for Perikatan Nasional really out of punishment towards especially UMNO. But now that they see this, I guess with the economic reforms that the government is currently pushing out, probably it has certain sort of positive impact towards unity government. The perception might have changed a little bit, but that doesn't mean that the other party is not advocating for the 3R issues.
Yep. And you know what? One of the article that we sort of have been talking privately is one of the article in Malaysia Kini by the founder of Sisters in Islam. And I think we will talk about that in another episode. But what was instructive was the way that she has been studying the use of race and religions in Malaysia since the 1980s. And her conclusions, and I tend to somewhat agree, is that the use of race and religions, even hudud and all these things, they are not really looking for Islamic state per se, but they are looking for consolidation of political power. If you can if you can create a siege mentality amongst the Malay and Muslim, then they will support you.
Yeah, I mean, fear always sells.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, I mean, we're going to talk about economy a bit later because it's like, I mean, why would anyone want to drive these nations into an Islamic state? Because that's not going to be economically beneficial, right, to the stakeholder. You think about it, when you have enjoyed free markets, and now, I mean, you can say what you want about Awang Hadi Awan, and I mean, my own view is that he is really more for the political power rather than the fundamentalist approach that a lot of people want to paint him. Now, of course, people will be like, oh, you are being ignorant here and things like that. But I would say the last 60 years, we have seen the threat of Islamic theocracy and things like that, but they have not been nearly as successful, right, in terms of forming government. I mean, could you imagine GPS supporting a theocratic government led by PN? I don't believe it will happen, because how are they going to present themselves as multicultural Sarawak? I just don't see that happening at all.
Well, but unfortunately, they were very, very quick to want to support the Perikatan Nasional.
So not because they want the racial religion supremacy, because I think they see that as the best way for them to consolidate their power. And most likely, Perikatan Nasional, they are going to leave GPS to their own device, like how it was with Yaakob Rahman, with Taib Mahmud. They just, whereas with Pakatan Harapan, they might come and, do investigation, MACC and things like that. But ironically, don't you think that Prime Minister Anwar was trying to kind of carry out favors, just kind of give a lot of gifts and openings, privileges to Sarawak and GPS?
Yeah.
And so I don't know, I was just hearing some coffee shop talk, and they were just saying that Abang Jo, the Premier of Sarawak, was actually quite happy with the unity government arrangement, but there was rumor that Deputy Prime Minister Fadila was maybe going to be more persuaded for something else, and he didn't say anything about supporting unity government until just yesterday or today.
But what would be even more lucrative than the DPM post itself?
That was what I was wondering about. What else can they give you? I mean, prime ministership, not at this juncture, but at some point, I believe that the East Malaysian states should have the privilege of leading the nation as prime minister. That would be the way for us forward in terms of having a genuine multi-cultural nation.
Yep.
But anyway, from Green Wave, we want to talk something which is really related, which is the economic issue. And Lara, you kind of caught on, you kind of caught on early on when you say that perhaps the Green Wave in the last GE was a protest vote. And But don't you find it interesting that Pakatan National wanted to frame the whole discussion on economy this time round? And I don't know. Are they really smart or are they really nutty? Because it's like Pakatan National, yes, of course, it's a different kind of composition. We talk about Muhyiddin round 1, then we talk about Sabri round 2, but very, very similar kind of composition, right? Except this time round, the unity government doesn't have, I mean, the Pakatan doesn't have Sabah and Sarawak. Instead, they kind of, with Zahid, they kind of merge with the Harapan gang to form a different kind of unity government. But what I'm trying to say is that we have seen version of Pakatan, right?
Yeah.
When we say Pakatan, we're talking about Malay-centric, Islam-centric, Malay-dominant, Islam-dominant kind of coalition. So, I mean, we have opportunity to look at how they perform in economy. But don't you find it, I mean, I constantly find it very amazing. I mean, maybe amazing is not the right word. That people will say, I think Muhyiddin is better at managing economy because inflation or our exchange rate is very bad right now. So what say you to this kind of proposition?
I think the person might have to read a bit more news to really discern what is happening. Because with what is happening with Pakatan National, I mean, you see how the whole economic really just plunges down to the deep, especially during COVID era.
And someone like KJ is also responsible, you know.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, of course, Barisan Nasional was in those Pakatan governments, but of course, nobody is trying to. Nobody from Pakatan, because they are now together, they can't really criticize each other without kind of shooting bullets at one another. But yeah, I mean, it's like, do you think people can differentiate what is happening around the world now with interest rate, with world economy in turmoil? Is that really, I mean, should Anwar Ibrahim really be responsible for all these things?
No, I think what he's doing is really the term whereby we say draining up the swamp. So what he's doing is really a cleanup of what has happened over the last 3 years. People really don't realize how much the whole nation has gone into debt just because of how, I think there's a lot of mismanagement of economy, the wealth of the nation that really just happened because you don't know what goes with the fund, especially with the COVID management and things like that. I mean, now more and more so you see the nations, I mean, like United States, there are a lot of accounting that is going on with how the funds were going on. I mean, concerning COVID management. And I think that's really one of the things that people could begin to see. Given the opportunity, Pakatan National, I think they won't hesitate to really cause people to get into a different kind of hardship. So it's just finding a different kind of mechanism to work around the whole system because they allow the EPF funds to be drawn out. I mean, all these sort of things, it's not prudent financial management.
Now, let's go back a few months to right after general elections. Now, remember during the whole horse trading moment, deciding who is going to be government. And when there was news that maybe Muhyiddin could form governments with Pakatan National, did you see the stock exchange kind of just went down?
Yep.
And there wasn't a lot of confidence. Even right now, you know, a lot of business community, business chamber of commerce, etc., they all kind of course, they cannot come out and just say, you know, a PN win is very, very bad. I mean, they can't do that because, you know, in all the 6 states, they still need to do business, right? So, but there are reports here and there that kind of just paint Pakatan National as not being the preferred government from the economic point of view. So I just find it strange. But of course, I mean, when I told you about all these sayings, I'm looking at a lot of mainstream media, I'm looking at online media, I'm looking at social media where there was this grassroots interview. It seems like people are maybe just looking at the present conditions and it's just always more convenient to blame the federal government, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you look at news, I think some of these news are really kind of been sidelined, especially the news concerning the economic reforms that the East Coast states that really wanted the states to have.
Yep.
And you think about who has been the state governments for this East Coast. I mean, these are the people that really also wanting them to grow. I mean, especially that children have been like just going to Klang Valley to work. I mean, it's really because of the hardship, because they don't see growth in those East Coast states. So, I mean, all these things are telltales that these are places that do need serious economic reform. So it's just bizarre, I mean, to think that economic bread and butter issue is not important in the state election.
So is it because of overemphasis on green wave, perhaps one point, or perhaps people are just kind of like still thinking in terms of this is general elections and maybe the unity government can fall if the performance is not so good? Maybe people are sidetracked by this kind of issue?
Maybe, but generally I'm just wondering, I mean, between bread and butter issue and also the issue of principle. Perhaps they see that the Pakatan Nasional is like a far right, like very, very conservative group of people. And perhaps it shows that they are very principled. Then again, you begin to see there are also a lot of corruption allegations against them. So what is it that the people are saying that how they seem to be holier than especially UMNO?
You know, here we always say, right, we are not for political retribution, right? Because otherwise, every time you have a change of government, it's never ending. But at the same time, I can understand why, for example, Muhyiddin is being charged. I mean, whether there is an actual fraud, the actual breach of trust, I mean, he will have his day in the court. But of course, from the unity government point of view now, of course, unity government, I mean, with Zahid there, with his impending court charges, he can't really say much. But talking about Pakatan Harapan generally, of course, you have some of their top leaders also having court cases. But, you know, they are trying to highlight, look, this group of leaders that you hold out so high, they actually are taking your money. And if you can become so angry at UMNO, then you should also reserve the same kind of anger at Pakatan. So I think that's what Anwar is trying to do now. Of course, we're not suggesting that there is any judiciary interference, but of course, investigation and charge are actually brought by AG Chambers, MACC. But do you think, I mean, in this state election, I haven't heard a lot of discussion on the cases of Muhyiddin and things like that. Perhaps the unity government is thinking that it might backfire on them.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, of course, I guess they have already done their calculated move.
Now, let's move on to the next issue, which I think is very important, but again, somewhat overlooked, which is the actual reform that we have been talking about since general election. Because one thing that is being leveled against the unity government is the lack of reform. Now, we have said many, many times in this show, there are reasons for that. We're not defending them, but with the unity government, your original manifesto is thrown out of the window because now you have UMNO, now you have GPS. These are not the original Pakatan Harapan gang, you know. So, this is what the voters decided, and unfortunately, any unity government is going to be a result of compromise. But that being said, okay, I think one incident that happened very, very recently kind of highlight the whole reform issue. Maybe Lyra, you want to talk about this because I think it should be something that is discussed more in this election, but somehow it is not.
You mean the racial quota?
Yeah, racial quota, and that's the whole interaction between the students and Anwar, right? So maybe just kind of run through the whole thing and, give us your preliminary analysis of the whole event. Because remember, we did one episode on affirmative actions in America. In fact, we have already recorded an episode on the Malaysian situation, but we just haven't got time to publish out. So I think right after the state election, we're going to do that episode. But we have a lot of thoughts on that. But just on that incident, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I guess following the overturning of affirmative action in the United States, you really begin to have high hopes for Malaysia to really shift away from all this really race-based affirmative action. Because, I mean, our Prime Minister himself is advocating for a need-based system, which is basically like a meritocracy sort of system. But the thing is, I guess I understand what our Prime Minister is saying that this is not time yet. I mean, I don't really agree necessarily that it should be postponed indefinitely, but I felt like this is really the avenue that we could begin to talk about this, because this girl, this teenager student, so she had this whole very elaborated questions that has been asked, because of course she did say, I would like to take 1 to 2 minutes to ask my questions and also give some explanation for that so that it won't be misinterpreted. I mean, I felt like it was interesting because that's how a lot of the, well, unfortunately we have to use the term woke, that woke students would be presenting. Is like, if you have a point to be made, you just go straight to the point. Why do you need to explain so many things? And so, but that's what exactly she did. So then she asked, so I quote, when will the quota system be abolished and replaced by a meritocracy system? My friends and I, as well as others that are not known, are affected by this quota system, all because they don't have Bumiputra status, she said. And then that's where the hoo-ha happened, because so Anwar Ibrahim just sort of stopped her because she said, look, if you have followed me in the Temu Anwar sessions, you would have known that I've already answered all these questions. And then he began to, well, of course, the citizens begin to say that, well, Anwar Ibrahim, how could you just criticize this student? I mean, this student raised a very good question, and how come you're like just shutting her down by like just basically give all your political speech? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I was just looking at the whole thing again, and there seems to be two issues here. One will be the way Prime Minister handles the questions. Then there is the issue, the substantial issue itself, which is the affirmative action and quota system. Now, from the political angle, election angle, few days from state elections, when the unity government sort of have been pandering to, you know, when I say pander, I'm talking about they're trying to, maybe mitigate is a better word. They're trying to say, look, what can we do to ensure there is no green wave? And whether that is their real strategy or not, but they are doing that in terms of pandering. You know, Prime Minister Anwar was saying, you know, going to enhance the religious rights, and of course this whole discussion on quota. So I want to talk about the substantial issue first. From the election point of view, of course, it will be suicidal. When I say suicidal, I'm talking about based on the unity government strategy so far to kind of pander, kind of just try to manage the fear or the siege mentality, because don't forget, the siege mentality has been deployed by all political forces for the last 60 years. We want to change that. We know it's important to change that, but it's not so easy to do it. So with the election being so close, I can understand why he wouldn't want to say, because that would just kind of undermine everything they have been doing. Is that correct? Is that constitutional? We have much discussion on that in the episode concerning the American Supreme Court decision, and also in Malaysia. I think we came to the conclusion it's not constitutional, it's not legally correct. However, when we look at May 13, when we look at NEP, we look at the last 30, 40 years, we cannot deny that this has become part of the fabric. Now, I mean, those of you who watch our show, you will know that we are very, very much against affirmative action, because that is really the essence of racism. But I'm going to have to say that I totally understand where Prime Minister is coming from. And I mean, this is the way they have campaigned, and they're going to stick by it. Then, of course, the second part about the tone, I don't find anything in particular. Of course, the question is, I think Prime Minister finds it irritating. It's like you're trying to sabotage my campaign and things like that. And so, yeah, maybe it's a bit rude to say you should have known about my you know, whatever, meet the Prime Minister's session and things like that. But yeah, I think it's maybe a reflection of his frustration that he... Now remember, he did a long interview with Al Jazeera, right? Just not too long ago. And you know, there's always a bit of contradiction there, because he knows that he has to present himself as a reformer. That was his credential, the reformasi. But at the same time, the last 6 months, you know, that's where the dilemma of the Pakatan Harapan supporter, they felt like especially from civil rights activists, from lawyers, from all the NGO, C4, all those, they just felt like not enough, too little, too late, 6 months. But we have always discussed it here, right, that it's the state elections, not justifying their action because, I believe there is a better way to do it, just kind of confront the issue, but they chose their poison. So I don't know, in the end, I don't feel like it's such a big deal because, we say that the true test is after state election if they're going to continue to pander. If they're going to continue to pander to race and religions, then eventually, I don't think you'll get many hardcore supporter, people like you and me, who are not going to change our vote so easily. But remember, the biggest party in Malaysia now is the undecided voters, or the party Tidak Undi. Anytime this category of people are moved, you're going to have a revolution. I'm talking about political tsunami in Malaysia because they represent the biggest untapped voter class right now.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I want to offer one very unpopular opinion. Because when I study how this teenage was asking the Prime Minister, because she said that, well, all of us, we are affected by this quota system, especially she and her friends, all because they don't have Bumi Putra status. Now, if you really look deep into this whole statement, I would say that she's actually been bound by the whole affirmative action because she's saying that, look, I come from this class, I come from this race, but I'm not being given the same kind of privilege that you're affording to the Bumi Putras. So in the same way, I felt like she was actually kind of like just throwing herself deep into the ends of affirmative action, although her words were that of meritocracy. So those would be my points, because when I look at it, I mean, now, of course, I don't think that the Prime Minister should, maybe lecture her too much. But I felt like there's also certain truth that the Prime Minister actually gave, because the Prime Minister obviously could discern that there's a lot of wokeness that really came from this student. And because he was in a university and, I mean, this school, whereby a lot of students are there. So how can you educate the whole next generation about moving away to meritocracy when your student present the whole concept of affirmative action itself? So I felt like there was sort of, maybe a bit of an appropriate response to how she raised the question. So that would be my very unpopular take.
I mean, eventually it has to be dealt with. But how you do it, I think it's going to be something that takes wisdom and I think affirmative action is very much linked with economy also, because we have to go back to May 13. We have to go back to NEP. Just look at the whole root issue. Yes, there's that imbalance there, but instead of solving the imbalance, in fact, the NEP created a new monopoly system, a new antitrust, to use the American term, because the GLC is basically like a monopoly. They are basically patronage kind of economy. And this is the whole systemic issue. And I think this is the right time for us to go into the next part of the discussion, which is the whole thing about decentralization. Because on one hand, I think it is, I mean, people are very concerned about green wave. Yes, maybe they are the race and religion, but at the same time, I feel like something that people have missed. In fact, some people have called Sanusi Donald Trump.
That is so interesting.
In Malaysia, because they say he's a populist, and that's the thing. I mean, we look at the example in America. Of course, we have Donald Trump, the American first, the MAGA. But of course, on the left side, you also have the populist movement, but they sort of have been absorbed into the establishment. You have the Bernie Sanders, you have the Elizabeth Warrens. Yes, they are very, very different in terms of value and what they want, but they are very, very similar in the sense that they energize the ground. And that is what is happening with Sanusi and in Kedah and in areas like this. And to me, it's a good development because the grassroots movement, the populist movement, is really going to be one of the ingredients in order for us to have decentralization. And that's why having state election and so diverse kind of issue, eventually we had to go into local council election. And that's going to be even more messy because suddenly you have you can put in councillors because you're not happy that nobody is picking out your rubbish, nobody is repairing your roads, potholes and things like that. And that's going to be the nature of democracy. You want less central power, then the power will have to be decentralized and the voters will have to become more responsible. So I mean, do you see this? I mean, I don't see so much of a highlight, but I do feel like it's going to be an impact because if you vote for something that is maybe a bit different from federal government, it doesn't necessarily mean that the federal government will fall. Or, I mean, they will be weakened, but it can. I don't know. I mean, this is using the thinking cap of decentralization, which is we support the power not being so consolidated, because even with a weakened prime minister, he still has tremendous power over Ministry of Finance, etc., etc. So I don't know. Did you see this being played out maybe in certain parts of this state election?
Yeah, I mean, I do see that because you really begin to see that there are a lot of populists, a lot of grassroots supporters, especially with some of these people, like the popular figures like Sanusi himself. Mm-hmm. So I really begin to think that there is really that possibility because you begin to hear people really differentiating the roles of federal government and the roles of state governments. And I felt like that sort of discussion is really, really instrumental in helping the low information voters, I mean, or even just average citizens to really begin to understand that, hey, actually, why do we need to bother our MP so much with our rubbish issues, with our longgang issues? I mean, all these sort of things, we should have our local councils being held responsible. So I felt like that is really a move away from federalism to really decentralization. And I felt like it's a good progression.
Yeah, I mean, federal versus state is one of the major theme of this show, right? Because I think with Sarawak leading the way in terms of discussions, I mean, we have not seen the end road yet. We haven't seen what is a final picture yet. But really, I think generally my feeling at the moment is most of us, we still want to be in the same country, but we just want more decentralizations. Actually, once upon a time, there's a professor from NUS. He used another term. He used the term devaluation. That means the central power is being devalued, reduced. And reduction of power, I mean, the power must go somewhere else, right? It will go to state, it will go to regions, it will go to city council, etc., etc. So those are good development, I think, because with COVID, with lockdown, we have seen the tyranny of centralization, don't you think?
Yeah, but I'm also very encouraged. I mean, although it's a bad example, we also saw that the SDMC, Sarawak Disaster Management Committee, they had their own rules, they had their own regulations.
For better or for the worse, right?
Yeah. I mean, concerning...
I mean, we constantly criticize them, I mean, for being totally illogical, but they had the right.
Exactly, and all those started really from state elections. So I felt like the people here, the state citizens, they really shouldn't be too overly concerned that, oh, we are decentralizing the federal government's power, but really begin to think of it as, what is it in it for my own state? Because obviously there are still a lot of people who wanted to stay in the state and they also want to grow for their respective states. So I felt like that really could pave a way for, like, I mean, even like oil producing states to really have control over what they the state.
Yeah, just suddenly you mentioned this because remember we were talking about the eastern states, especially the way they handle development wasn't great and things like that. But of course, we have to understand that they were kind of pressed by the federal, especially when it comes to petroleum and things like that. Oh, by the way, I just David Tian is ready to join us, so why don't we kind of put him? Hi, David. Can you hear us?
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Yeah. Hi, nice to see you.
Yeah, good. Great to see you also.
Yeah, I can hear the ceramah behind. Where are you now?
I am in Kota Harapan is a seat in Alostar.
Okay, so in Alosa area. So this is whose Charama today?
Today is in Kota Harapan is mainly Pakatan Harapan. And just now we got terminal leaders here. It's like very frequent already. It's like every Charama we got. Yeah, I can.
Okay. Sorry. Just now the line kind of dropped. Okay. So David, we don't want to take too much of your time, but because we are so near to the election day already, right? So just tell us very quickly, what are you feeling now on the ground? You know, like you have been involved with campaign for so many days. I'm sure consuming a lot of news, insider information. But just quickly, 1 or 2 points. What are you feeling on the ground right now?
Okay, one line summary is all things are very hard to catch, especially for the Malay voters. We are kind of we don't know what they are choosing in the election day. So some Malay voters are friendly to us, and they somehow say they will support us, but we don't know at the end they will or not. All the things can only end up with the election when we know the result. But according to the leaders or the candidates here, they are kind of have different feeling now because last time seems like the Malay voters are more friendly to them. Now some of the youngsters, they are like bulat, they don't want to support you. So we are facing this kind of scenarios on the ground, especially in the northern peninsula. But I don't know what has happened in Selangor. But in Kedah here, we feel like it's not easy at all to Charama to go as our usual way to campaign. It's a very different kind of things. Charama is not much people than before. Um, some some reason or some alasan they use is most people watch it online, which is valid, which is fair enough also. But according to all the physical thing, we cannot have a very obvious kind of feedback. All the things is like kind of at the online. So online is also like PH and BN not totally left out, not totally cut off in the TikTok. Seems like we have better preparation than PRU 15, but we still are left behind. But I think the wind can change within one a day. So don't know what will happen. So overall, it's like hardly catch what they feel. Yeah.
So you feel it's going to be quite an open election? Is it fair to say?
Yeah. Both sides are. It's like I will say both sides use all their tactics to attack each other. It's like very intense fight between each other.
Now, David, I just want, I know you're based in Kedah and maybe you get a bit of news and feel from Penang, but what are some of the things that you've been hearing for Selangor, for example, Selangor and Negeri Sembilan? Not sure if you are following the development there, but what is the discussion there right now?
Okay, I do keep in touch with my friends and my colleagues there. They are like Selangor is really 50-50. Some of the marginal seats like Sekincang, like KKB, Kuala Kubu Baru, like Sungai Pilek is very marginal for DAP. Some of the DAP leaders even said if they lose this three seats, they might lose the state government. But according to my observation, it's like Sekincang, we might still have a chance to sustain. Other two, we also might have the still to secure lah. But for Negeri Sembilan, the situation is like they seems like in the national level, PN leaders are not attacking PH and BN leaders there. It's like opposite in Kedah scenario. In NS, we have a very strong leader for PH like Anthony Locke and PN, Tokmat and Jalaluddin. For PN, you actually see no one strong there. So according to the news I observed these few days, I might think that they might think at Negeri Sembilan is not easy for Pakatan National.
Yeah, so maybe the resources are not spent there. All right, David. I know the next time we're going to talk to you, the result will be out already. But maybe just let us know one. I mean, you already highlight like Sekinjang and things like that. But maybe one or two other issue that the voters should be watching out for in terms of this coming Saturday.
I think overall, if you forget all the things we say in this episode, you have to know that you have to know your responsibility as a voter, as a citizen when you vote. Some will saying this is just a state election, but this state election in the history of Malaysia is very crucial and very important. Also, we never have 6 state elections separate with PRU. Especially Malaysia are facing whether we want to go to a more kind of progressive, we want to more strengthen our economy, or we want to talk about more of the religion, or more about the ratio. Both do not wrong, but we have to decide whether we want to head to what direction we want to head to.
Okay, David. So nice hearing from you, and so all the best for the rest of your work there. And we're going to put your link down there for people who can follow you. So I think the next time we'll try to dial in will be Saturday evening already, and hopefully, we'll see what kind of result the voters kind of put in this time. Yeah, I think we kind of lost him already, but it's all right. I think we kind of. So Lara, what do you think of David's assessment? We sort of had a test recording with him, right? I mean, we didn't manage to publish that, but that's like a week ago, and he was two weeks ago, and at that time it's like, very similar, right? It's still like anything goes kind of thing.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it doesn't seem like although they are really, really on the ground, it seems like they are still very much like allowing the voters to choose for themselves. So I felt like that's a good progression, because that really shows that whichever party could court them.
Yep. And that's not a bad thing. I don't feel like it's something to be alarmed with, because at the end of the day, the voters will have to decide for themselves. Oh, one last thing before we go, I just suddenly realized we haven't really talked about Muda or the third force. Just
How
one or
can
two points.
Forget them?
Yeah, Lyra, just one or 2 points, and then I think we want to wrap up already today.
Well, there are lots of criticisms, especially from PH supporters, hardcore PH supporters, because look, how dare you?
As a spoiler, right?
Yeah, choose the same seats as us. I mean, with only 1 or 2 seats that they're contesting against Pakatan National. But I feel like that's not necessarily a bad thing, because you could really begin to see that because they have clear 4 reformations that they really want to push through, and they felt like they're not necessarily like breaking ranks with PH. I felt like at the federal level, they are still very much friendly to Pakatan Harapan, because that's the unity government that they have agreed to form together. But another part was because they say, hey, this is state election. Why not we come out and we try to be a third force? Although I felt like Syed Saddiq, he's a little bit unsure whether or not to be really, really going for full force, like third force, or really just like showing that, hey, Pakatan Harapan, I'm just trying to keep you in check and balance here, because you seem to be pandering too much to your partner, UMNO.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned something very interesting, which is they contest mostly in unity government. Now, of course, I'm not sure the exact breakdown, some in Pakatan Harapan seats, some in UMNO, Barisan National seats, and not much in Perikatan. I guess based on their values, their manifesto, they are basically going for reform-centric kind of voters. So I can't really blame them for that. But do you think they will make a dent this time around?
Well, I certainly hope not. I hope that they will win at least a sizable. I mean, of course, personally, I do support Pakatan Harapan, but I felt like they should be given a voice, because if not now, when else? Because in the I think a few episodes ago, we did talk about should UMNO remain forever. And I felt like there should be a time in the Malaysian history whereby you begin to see that there are actually viable third force that is rising up. And I felt like Muda could be that viable third force. I mean, even political scientists like Wong Chin Huat, he was saying that, look, if they play their cards well, they could possibly win some seats. And I do hope that there are still ways for them to turn around. I mean, that the supporters, they really begin to look at what they really wanted for the state government and choose wisely. So I hope that they will win a couple.
But their strategy, and we're just talking, right, it's a bit similar to Ron DeSantis in US, right? Because Ron DeSantis, could have come out and play a MAGA kind of campaign, but instead he became establishment. Whereas Muda is different. They could have come out and say, look, we can get some vote that will help the unity government, but instead they kind of go into a war attrition in a lot of the strong. Kind of remind me of Siti Kasim and friends in the last general election. But of course it's a different season now. I mean, most of them lost their deposit, right, in PRU 15. But still, based on what David Tiang was saying, anything goes. And, maybe something like what has happened in the Thai election could just, you never know the wave, right? I mean, 308 was the most unexpected wave in the history of Malaysian political climate.
Well, I felt like if they really play their cards well, because now they are partnering with PSM, Parti Socialist Malaysia, they could possibly be like a very viable candidate like Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, if you have to compare Bernie Sanders with Hillary Clinton, I think a lot of Democrats would probably choose Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton. But it's just that the forces were rallying behind them. But I felt like if they don't play their cards as badly as how Ron DeSantis' campaign is, they could possibly still salvage and possibly could still win certain seats, because I do like what they have presented in terms of the reforms that they want to bring about. And it's kind of in line with what we have been saying that, look, Pakatan Harapan, you should be bringing reforms to the table and not really pandering so much. And what they are trying to do in this state election, I think they are trying to show that they have a voice here, that they really do want Pakatan Harapan to really, hey, come on, let's crash correct and come back to your lane.
Yep. And I guess they do need a couple of seats to be able to have a place on the table to have discussion. And that's the kind of disrespect they have been given by the unity government, unfortunately. But so we'll see, whether they can make a dent and perhaps become a viable option, All right, so I think that's all the time we have for today. And, this Saturday, if you are a registered voter in all the 6 states, right? We have Penang, we have Kelantan, Terengganu, Kedah, Selangor, and Negeri Sembilan. We want to highly encourage, regardless of who you vote for, you should go and vote, because that's your right, that's your obligation as a citizen. Otherwise, do not complain when things don't go so well.
Yeah, and if you vote, don't have undi rosak, please. I mean, I think spoil vote is not a way for boycotting. I mean, you can make your voices known in elsewhere, but not in the state election, because every vote counts.
Yep. Okay, so the next time we'll come back to be right after the evening of state election, where we'll do our initial response to the. By then, I think we will have the result of all the 6 states.